Namaskaromi and welcome everyone to our 8th session in these explorations into the traditions of yoga. Now, if you remember, for the past few weeks, we've been working through 3 major strands of pre-modern yoga that became interwoven into a kind of rope, maybe, that we can call modern yoga. This modern yoga was created in the 1890s to the 1920s by Indian thinkers and practitioners like Swami Vivekananda, Yogananda, Krishnamacharya. The first of these that we looked at was the Patanjala yoga, the mind or cognition-based yoga, which was delineated by Patanjali around 300 to 400 CE. Here the idea, if you remember, was to gain freedom from karmic bondage, rebirth, suffering, by separating that eternal spirit, the Purusha, from your material body. You did it through practices that enabled the cessation of the turnings of the mind. Yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Right? The second stream of pre-modern yoga was what Vivekananda had called Raja Yoga, royal yoga. This was more religious or spiritually driven. It's found in the Gita, the Song of the Blessed Lord, written sometime between 200 BC to 200 CE. As you remember, this was where Krishna teaches Arjuna the different pathways to gain freedom from karmic bondage. The path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga, the path of action, Karma Yoga, the path of devotion, Bhakti Yoga. These were basically ways that ordinary people, like you or me, could detach their spirit from their material body without having to renounce your everyday life and to do harsh ascetic practices. Today we'll be looking at a third type of pre-modern yoga that's a very important precursor to what we find in modern yoga studios. This is called Hatha Yoga, the yoga of forceful exertion, Hatha. The earliest Sanskrit texts that describe Hatha Yoga start to appear about 1,000 years ago. Hatha Yoga concentrates not on the mind, not on the spirit, but on the body, and seeks to gain control over the various materialities and the energies that the body is supposed to be filled with. Maybe the most familiar feature to you of Hatha Yoga are the lists of asanas, or postures, that yogis were asked to do as part of larger Hatha Yoga practices. Many of these postures were directly borrowed into modern yoga by gurus like Krishnamacharya, Shivananda, and so on. Mallinson explains on page 771, the modern yoga widely practiced around the world today is derivative of Hatha Yoga, although it places a greater emphasis on asana, physical postures, than is found in traditional Hatha Yoga. So let's talk about what does have greater emphasis in that traditional Hatha Yoga. The question that we'll ask today is, what was Hatha Yoga in the medieval period? Now, before we jump into it, I should say that the histories of yoga in the medieval period, basically this time from 1000 CE until about 1800, these histories are really complicated. Scholars are only just now beginning to figure out what happened. So just now, new texts are being discovered and read and understood, not just in that classical language of Sanskrit, actually, but also in the regional vernacular languages like Old Hindi, Gujarati, Old Marathi, Bengali, Kashmiri, Tamil, Kannada, Telugu, and so on. Also in Islamic literatures that were written in Persian or Urdu, we get descriptions of yoga. We're only really at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to understanding the medieval world of Hatha Yoga. So who knows, if maybe one of you gets interested, maybe you can make real, genuine contributions to the field of yoga studies. It really is a fledgling field. There's lots more work to be done. Today, I thought what we could do is just very gently touch on just the surface of this thing called medieval Hatha Yoga and get a very basic idea of what the goals were, what Hatha yogis were doing back in medieval India between 1000 to 1800 CE. Mallinson explains that the original aims of Hatha Yoga, at least in the earliest texts that describe it, it was to raise and conserve the physical essence of life, identified in men as bindu, which literally means a drop of fluid. Here it means semen, and it was imagined to be constantly dripping downward from a store in the head and being expended through sexual intercourse and other such things. The equivalent in women to the bindu is the menstrual fluid called rajas in Sanskrit. Mallinson points out actually on 779 that it does seem like Hatha Yoga was open to women, though these medieval texts were all written for men. I should also mention here that in medieval Hatha Yoga, we find another mystical explanation of what's going on inside your body. And this was coming from the tantric direction. And it's different from this kind of semen theory, if you will. This is quite obviously restricted to men, right? We'll be talking about the tantric side more next week, but these tantric yoga practitioners imagine the energy inside of us not to be semen per se, but instead to be a serpentine goddess called the Kundalini, which was usually lying coiled and dormant in the lower abdomen of men and women, or any other gender for that matter. This Kundalini gets awakened through yogic practice and is made to rise up through the spine and into the head. That's where she releases the energy that she's carrying, and it turns into the nectar of immortality. Maybe this Kundalini model, which gets adapted into Hatha Yoga, proved to be more suitable for female practitioners. Who knows? Anyway, for Hatha Yoga practitioners, the basic idea was that you used a combination of breath exercises, yogic postures, physical locks, seals of the body to move those fluid energies that were contained in your nether regions, in the semen or in the Kundalini serpent, move them up through a subtle channel that was located in the spine and then into the head. There, this fluid would be heated up through meditative practice that generated a kind of ascetic heat inside your body, which was called tapas. It would get turned through this heat into what's called amrita, the nectar of immortality. This nectar of immortality, amrita, did exactly what it said. It provided the yogi with ultimate liberation, mukti, from death. Here, the idea was not to escape the body necessarily, but actually to immortalize the body itself, to experience what's called jivan mukti, a living liberation. Along the way, a yogi would gain what are called siddhis, both mundane benefits as well as magical powers. These included long life, good health, getting rid of wrinkles, getting rid of gray hair, divine eyesight, the ability to change size and shape, to fly, to enter into other people's bodies, a bunch of other supernatural abilities as well. Anyway, these are the objectives of Hatha Yoga: to manipulate the body and the breath through the internal subtle channels of the body, and then push either semen or the Kundalini serpent energy goddess up the spine into the cranium, gain health, magical powers, immortality. So let's take a quick break here. When we come back, I thought we could dig into some of the specifics and look at the different kinds of practices, the stuff that people actually had to do as part of medieval Hatha Yoga. Dhanyawada.